he stood quietly at the cemetery gates. His coat was clean but weathered, his boots polished, though faded from time. In one trembling hand, he held a folded flag. In the other, a small bouquet of white carnations, each one carefully arranged. But the guard didn't care. "Sorry, sir. Family only past this point." The old man nodded politely. "I understand. But I served with General Whitaker. I just want to pay my respects." The young soldier barely looked at him. Orders are orders, no exceptions. Book 45. The man they were burying saved an entire unit from an ambush in '73. But now they wouldn't even let his comrade through the gate. A light drizzle began to fall. The wind tugged at his coat, but he didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the honor guard in the distance, where a silver casket glinted beneath the canopy. "I promised I'd be there," he whispered. 30 minutes earlier, the old man had boarded bus 42 across town. He didn't drive anymore. His license expired years ago. But he still had his uniform pressed, perfect. And his mind? Still sharp, despite what the VA paperwork said. He'd rehearsed what he would say to the general's wife. He had planned to stand at the edge, say nothing, salute once, then leave. But none of that would happen. As the minutes passed, other cars rolled up. SUVs, black sedans, tinted windows. Men in metals stepped out, umbrellas unfurled before they got wet. None of them looked twice at the man still waiting near the gate. Hook, 130. He wasn't asking for attention. He was asking for permission and being denied by a man half his age who'd never even seen war. A journalist from a local paper walked past the checkpoint. She caught sight of the man standing alone. "Are you with the family?" she asked gently. "No, I'm with the war." She paused. "Vietnam?" "Aye." He nodded. "I was 2nd platoon. He was our captain back then." She looked past him at the distant canopy. "They're starting." And then he heard it, the crack of the first rifle. Bang. 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 A 21-gun salute, and he wasn't there. That was when it happened. One of the younger officers near the front noticed the commotion at the gate. He whispered something to the 4-star general standing beneath the tent. That general turned his head slowly. His face changed. Instantly. He stepped out into the rain and started walking toward the old man. Final hook, cliffhanger. No one spoke. Everyone turned. A 4-star general, the highest-ranking man at the funeral, was walking away from the casket. Toward the man they had refused. It was as if the entire funeral paused mid-breath. From the distance, the 4-star general walked with deliberate, sharp steps. Each stride cut through the drizzle like a blade. Metals gleamed against his dark uniform, his hat never shifting, his eyes locked straight ahead, not at the casket, not at the soldiers, but at the old man who stood, unnoticed, at the gate. "Who is that?" Someone whispered among the crowd. "I think he's no one," another replied. They were all wrong. The young guard at the gate stiffened as the general approached. "Sir, this man," said he. The general raised a gloved hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Do you know who this man is?" "No, sir." The general turned to face the old man fully. "He's the reason I joined the Corps." Hook, 50. Everyone watching now realized this wasn't just some stranger. This was a soldier whose name had echoed through barracks for decades but never made headlines. The general stepped forward and saluted. Sharp, clean, absolute. The old man blinked once, then returned the salute slower, with a slight tremble but no less proud. "Permission to enter, sir?" The old man said softly. "Permission granted," the general replied. "Me and overdue." He turned to the stunned guard. "If you ever block a war hero again, you'll be saluting traffic cones in Texas." As the two men walked side by side toward the burial site, whispers spread like fire through the crowd. "That's Sergeant Elijah Miles," someone finally said. "They said he carried 2 wounded men out of a jungle under fire. Didn't he go missing?" "No, he came home. But no one asked what happened after." When they reached the casket, the chaplain paused. "General, would you like to continue?" he asked. But the general shook his head. "No, there's someone here who's waited too long to speak." He turned to Elijah. The crowd, now fully seated, fell completely silent. Elijah cleared his throat. "I didn't come to speak. I came to listen. But since I'm standing here..." He placed the folded flag beside the casket, then took a deep breath. James Whitaker wasn't just a captain. He was the man who pulled me out of the Mekong River when I was 19, bleeding and terrified. He taught me what it meant to lead. He kept a photo of his wife inside his helmet and a Bible in his boot. Hook, too. The stories Elijah told next weren't in any official record. Not in medals, not in footnotes. They were memories raw, human, and untold. He spoke of mud, of hunger, of brotherhood. Of the time Whitaker gave up his last ration for a sick soldier. Of how he stood between his men and a mortar blast that should have ended them all. And of the last thing he said before they were both evacuated. "If I don't make it, tell Ruth I died thinking of her. And tell the kid in 2nd Platoon he made it worth it." Elijah's voice cracked. "I never got to tell her. But now I've told all of you." When he finished, even the chaplain looked shaken. The general placed a hand on his shoulder. "You just gave him the finest eulogy any of us could have." The crowd stood. One by one, strangers walked up to Elijah and shook his hand. A young officer removed his own insignia pin and placed it into Elijah's palm without a word. Final hook, cliffhanger. But not everyone was applauding. One man in the second row watched Elijah with narrowed eyes, holding a folder stamped confidential. As the crowd began to disperse, the storm held back as if the heavens themselves had paused in respect. Elijah stood in silent reflection by the grave, the folded flag clutched tightly in his hands. But not everyone had left. From behind a row of manicured hedges, a man in a navy blue trench coat stepped out. He held a thin, creased file with a red stamp across the front, confidential eyes only. He didn't salute. He didn't smile. He waited. And when Elijah turned and saw him, the old soldier's body visibly tensed. "You shouldn't be here," Elijah said. "Neither should you," the man replied. "But now that we're both ghosts, let's talk about the fire we left behind." Book 40. This wasn't just a forgotten soldier. Elijah Miles had been erased from history for a reason. The man introduced himself with a single word. Coleman. Department of Military Records. "I've been tracking inconsistencies in Vietnam operations for the last 15 years. And I know who you are. I know what you did." Elijah's face didn't move. Only his fingers gripped the flag tighter. "You testified in secret hearings. You leaked movement intel to save a trapped unit. You violated direct orders and you saved lives." Coleman opened the folder. This file should have been burned. But it wasn't. Inside, a photo of a young Elijah with a wounded soldier on his back. A blacked-out report with Operation Silent Echo. A hand-scribbled note, "If this gets out, we're all finished." Hook 125. What the country called a heroic rescue, the government labeled unauthorized engagement. Coleman looked Elijah dead in the eyes. "They buried your medals, changed your name on internal logs, and ordered that if you ever showed up in uniform you'd be escorted out before questions were asked." Elijah whispered. "That's why they stopped me at the gate." At that moment, General Mathers reappeared. "Is there a reason this man is interrogating one of my own?" he asked coldly. Coleman didn't flinch. Sir, this isn't a witch hunt. This is history correction. Someone in your ranks erased Sergeant Miles, and it wasn't for protocol. It was for politics. Elijah looked at the general. Is that true? Did they erase me to protect some agenda? General Mathers' face darkened. I was a second lieutenant then. I was told you died in Cambodia. I watched you be lifted out by helicopter barely alive. And the next morning, you were gone. No files, no records. He paused. Pumper. But they didn't tell us why. Only that we were never to mention your name again. Hook, 210. What started as a funeral had become the resurrection of a forgotten legacy and the unraveling of a decades-old cover-up. Elijah took the file. Let me guess, if I speak, they'll call me a liar. An old man with memory issues. Just another rumor. Coleman nodded. Unless someone with real power stands beside you. Mathers clenched his jaw. Then I guess it's time I finally did the job they trained me for. He placed a call. Get the press. Get the Pentagon. Get everyone. If Sergeant Elijah Miles is still alive, it's time his name was restored. Cliffhanger 3. A flash of cameras lit the air behind them, but not from reporters. A long black car had just pulled up, and the man who stepped out wore the same insignia as the general. But this one had 5 stars. A polished black military vehicle rolled up onto the wet gravel. No sirens, no escort, just presence. And then the door opened. Out stepped a man in a crisp uniform with a chest full of medals and 5 silver stars gleaming under the gray sky. His face was unreadable, eyes cold, and his stride deliberate. General Decker, whispered Mathers. Joint Chiefs. Everyone fell silent. Hook, 40. When the man with the highest authority in the military arrives unannounced, someone's reputation is about to be rewritten. Decker didn't speak right away. He stopped in front of Elijah and glanced down at the confidential folder in his hand. That file was meant to stay buried, he said coldly. Elijah didn't flinch. So was I. The crowd, now swelling with reporters, cameras, and onlookers, closed in. Microphones pushed forward. A news chopper circled above. Coleman, still holding a copy of the file, stepped forward. General, with all due respect, this man was erased without due process. Denied his pension, his recognition, even a headstone under his real name. You want to talk about national honor? Start by fixing this. Hook, 125. The truth was now public, and the only thing more dangerous than a cover-up was exposing it in real time. Decker's voice was low but sharp. This funeral has turned into a media circus. My command is to clear the perimeter and control the narrative. General Mathers stepped in. With all due respect, sir, your command stops here. A ripple went through the crowd. Cameras flashed. This man saved 41 soldiers during Operation Silent Echo. I was one of them. And I'm not staying silent anymore. Decker's lip twitched. You're walking on treason, General. No, said Mathers, looking at Elijah. I'm walking on justice. Hook, 2. The fight was no longer about medals, it was about memory, truth, and the cost of silence. Elijah stepped forward, finally raising his voice. For decades I said nothing. I watched the world move on without me. I carried the burden alone. He held up the flag. You handed me this at the funeral of a man I trained, and yet you refused to recognize I even existed. A reporter shouted. Sir, what do you want now? Elijah answered without hesitation. I want a name. On a wall. In a book. On a record. I want the next soldier who Googles Sergeant Elijah Miles to find the truth. Hook, 250. This wasn't a story anymore. It was testimony. And the world was watching. Suddenly, a soldier from the press perimeter shouted, "I served under him. Iraq, 2003. He trained us, taught us how to survive ambushes." Another voice rang out, "Kandahar. He pulled me from under a flipped Humvee." People from the crowd began stepping forward, not just one, not two, a dozen. Veterans. Quiet men with scars and medals. "I owe my life to him. He never told anyone. Now it's our turn." General Decker looked shaken. His voice dropped. "If you speak further, there will be hearings, congressional subpoenas, investigations." "So be it," Elijah said. "I'm done hiding." Cliffhanger, 3:40. A reporter whispered into her mic. Sources confirm the Pentagon is reopening closed records from the Vietnam era. This funeral may be the spark that unravels decades of military secrecy. And somewhere in the crowd, an anonymous man picked up his phone and sent a message. He's talking. Begin Phase 2, the truth that shook the nation. They didn't expect him to speak. They certainly didn't expect millions to listen. But when Elijah Miles stepped forward, every voice in Arlington went quiet. Cameras flashed. The nation held its breath. He wasn't there for attention.
He wasn't there for redemption. He was there for the truth they tried to bury. I was 23 when I watched my friend die next to me, he said, his voice steady. And 79 when I finally stopped blaming myself for surviving. He held up the black folder, the same one they tried to seize. Operation Silent Echo, he continued. That's what they called it, but there was nothing silent about what we saw in that jungle. He paused. His eyes scanned the crowd. Politicians, veterans, journalists, families. The very men who once erased his name from the records now stood motionless. They told us we were rescuing hostages, but we were sent to eliminate witnesses, innocents, children, prisoners. I refused. His voice broke not from weakness, but from carrying the weight too long. For that disobedience, I was disappeared, not with a bullet, but with silence. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They offered me money, a fake name, a new life. I chose the streets instead. I chose hunger over lies because truth was the only thing I had left. At that moment, General Mathers stepped forward. In his hand, a small velvet box. Elijah Miles, he began, voice low, on behalf of the United States. But Elijah raised a hand. I don't need a medal. The general froze. I need acknowledgement. I need the school books rewritten. I need my brothers' names cleared. I need the next generation to know what happened, not what was edited. People in the crowd began to cry. Some lowered their flags. Others raised their fists. Then, in a moment no one expected, Elijah turned to the military brass. Don't give me honors. Give me honesty. Don't give me silence. Give me space in the history books. By nightfall, the president's office released an official statement. An investigation was opened. Operation Silent Echo was declassified. Elijah Miles was reinstated, his medals restored, his story no longer a whisper. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees of Arlington, Elijah sat quietly on a bench, alone for the first time that day. A reporter approached. Do you feel justice was served? Elijah looked up, his eyes reflecting both pain and peace. Justice isn't a medal. Justice is memory. And they'll remember now.